Oh, help! Gordon cried as he slid off the tracks and into a field. Was hurt, but poor Gordon felt very undignified.
Henry braked hard, but the freight cars hit some of the rubble and plunged into the ravine. Just then, Henry's driver saw a strange sight coming.
Freight train was waiting in the siding to let the flying kipper pass, and the driver and fireman were drinking cocoa in the caboose. "The kipper is due," said the conductor. "Who cares?" said the fireman. "This is good cocoa." The driver got up. "Come on, fireman, back to our engine." They got out just in time. And didn't care what he did. He waited till the table was halfway round. I'll show them, he hissed. He moved slowly forward to jam the table, but he couldn't stop himself and slithered into a ditch. "Whoosh!" he hissed. "Get me out! Get me out!" "Not a hope," said his driver and fireman. "You're stuck, you silly great engine. Don't you understand that?" They telephoned Sir Topham Hatt. "So Gordon didn't want to take the special train and ran into a ditch?"
Something had jammed. The driver reduced steam, but Gordon was still going too fast.
Was unloading a huge ship's boiler. Suddenly, the crane swung the boiler and knocked Edward right off the track.
And applied the brakes. Poor Thomas stood dazed and surprised in a muddy pond as a toad eyed him suspiciously. "Bust my buffers," muttered Thomas. When Duck returned, Diesel was trying to take some cars from a siding. They were old and empty. They'd not been touched for a long time. Diesel found them hard to move. "Pull! Push! Backwards, forwards! Oh! Oh!" The cars groaned. "We can't! We won't!" Duck watched with interest. Diesel lost patience. He roared and gave a great heave. The cars jerked forward. "Oh!" they screamed. "We can't! We won't!" Some of their brakes snapped and the gear jammed in the sleepers. Chuckled Duck. Diesel recovered and tried to push the cars back, but they wouldn't move. Duck ran quietly round to collect the other cars. "Thank you for arranging these, Diesel. I must go now."
There were lots of people he could show off to.
"Watch how smoothly I can go,"
puffed Gordon. Gordon was so busy showing off, he didn't see how icy the track was. Gordon slid right through the station and into a siding. Everyone watched as he puffed into a big pile of snow. Yuck! Coughed Gordon. Luckily, no one was hurt.
Every wise engine knows that you cannot trust trucks. Go on! and brought Percy's driver and fireman off the footplate. "Oh!" said Percy, sliding past the board. Percy was frantic. "Best he not!" Percy was sunk.
No one realized that melted snow had turned a stream ahead into a torrent, and the bridge above it was about to collapse. The rails were now like a tightrope across the thundering water. The driver braked hard. Toby stopped, still on the rails, but with his wheels treading the tightrope over the abyss. Toby still didn't want to speak to the Fat Controller. Quickly, he reversed into a siding and didn't see that a big rock had fallen on the line. "Bus by cowcatchers," he cried. Disaster lay ahead. Something sticky splashed all over James. He had run into 2 tar wagons and was black from smokebox to cad. He was more dirty than hurt. But the tar wagons and some cars were all to pieces. But it was too late. Thomas didn't notice that the points had been changed. Thomas puffed into the sidings and biffed into the buffers. Sticky toffee splattered everywhere. "Oh no," moaned Thomas. "I can't give the children train rides when I'm this messy." And he didn't see the goods train ahead until it was too late. Luckily, no one was hurt, but Gordon came off the rails. He was covered in gooey red jam. He raced past a very surprised Thomas and straight into the snow. Mr. Percival was very cross. "Skarloey, you have broken the winch." "Oh, no," cried Percy. Luckily, no one was hurt. When he approached the chocolate factory, his driver applied the brakes, but Percy's wheels just skidded on the oily rails. "Oh, no," hooted Percy. "Yuck," he groaned. "I've never been this dirty." He was covered from funnel to firebox in sticky, gooey chocolate.
This made Cranky very cranky. So cranky that he swung his arm around and dropped the pipes onto the tracks instead of the trucks. Whoops.
This made Emily very cross, and she biffed them very hard. "Oh no," they cried, and splashed into the duck pond. Emily was covered in a floury mess. As he battled against the rain, more trouble lay ahead. "Oh," hissed Percy, "the water is sloshing my fire." Empty cars became derailed. The winch groaned. "Break it! Snap it!" shouted the freight cars.
They did. On, faster, faster, they giggled. The snowbank and buffers will stop him, said a workman. But he was wrong. The freight cars plunged into the ravine. Skarloey and his driver heard the noise and looked up. Avalanche! They cried. When the snow plume cleared, there was no sign of Skarloey. He was buried deep inside the high drift.
Frantically trying to grip the rails, Percy slid into the yard. Beep! Beep! Look out! The brake van was in smithereens. Percy's driver and fireman had jumped clear, but Percy was stranded.
Into a tunnel thinking how clever he was, but there was trouble ahead. Cinders and ashes, said Thomas. I'm stuck. And he was. He pulled the empty coaches away, then came back for Thomas. Terence tugged and slipped and slipped and tugged, and at last dragged Thomas clear of the snow, ready for the journey home. Thomas raced into the yard. Percy was coming the other way. Thomas bumped straight into Percy, and the bunting flew up in the air. Percy's trucks came off the track, and so did Thomas. You've spilt my bunting, moaned Percy. Suddenly, she was on a steep hill. Her driver applied the brakes. Elizabeth slid out of control into a deep snowdrift. Poor Elizabeth. He didn't see Gordon in the express until it was too late. The brake van passed Gordon. The tar wagons didn't. Luckily, no one was hurt, but Gordon was very cross. Then there was trouble. The tall funnel of the old barge crashed through a pipe. James was sure he'd get covered in sludge, but he didn't. Shiny and clean, he declared again. He propped his bike against Percy's mail truck and rushed away. "Stop!" cried Percy, but Tom was out of sight. There was worse to come. Percy's driver hadn't seen the bike and he started away. "Oh no!" cried Percy. "Now there'll be trouble." And there was. Percy's driver quickly stopped the train. Everyone came running to the scene. Tom Tipper's bicycle was in pieces.
Just ahead was a stretch where the hot sun had bent the rails on the track. "Careful, Thomas," called his driver, but it was too late. "That's done it," said his driver. "We shan't get any further today." "But what about my passengers?" asked Thomas.
They missed a signal and went onto the wrong line. Gordon was traveling to trouble. Ahead was a tunnel under repair. His driver reduced steam and braked hard. But it was too late. I have
Got to hurry, puffed Thomas. He huffed, and he puffed, and at last, the coupling broke. Thomas shot forward, cocoa powder flew everywhere. Now I'll never get to take the children, puffed Thomas.
Max was still cross with Monty. He decided to bump him back. Before they knew it, they skidded off the track and into a ditch.
Then there was trouble. Rheneas raced right off the track. Oh no! Cried Skarloey. The signal changed. Spencer and Thomas wheeshed away. Thomas was determined to win. The Fat Controller, Lady Hat, and the Duke and Duchess of Boxford were waiting on the platform at Kelsthorpe. Suddenly, there was a thundering and a whooshing. Spencer and Thomas were pumping their pistons and bubbling their boilers to arrive at Kelsthorpe first. Spencer screeched to a halt, but Thomas raced straight through the station. There was a rush of wind so big it blew the Fat Controller's hat right off his head. As Sir Handel puffed into the wharf, there was nobody to be seen. Now, Thomas cried. He blew his new whistle as loudly as he could. The little engines blew their whistles too. Sir Handel biffed his trucks in surprise. Flour flew up into the air like a great white cloud. You look like a ghost, laughed Rusty. Whoa, laughed Sir Handel. Look at me, I'm a ghost. And he steamed away.
There was the station master's house. The station master was about to have breakfast. Horrors, cried Thomas, and shut his eyes. The house rocked, broken glass tinkled, plaster was everywhere. Thomas had collected a bush on his travels. He peered into the room through its leaves. The barber had set up shop. He was shaving a customer. The silly cars had knocked their conductor off his van and left him far behind after he had whistled the warning. But the cars didn't care. They were feeling very pleased with themselves.
Edward was in such a rush, he didn't ask the signalman. Stop, shouted the signalman. That track is closed. Edward rattled round a bend and straight into a barrier. Parcels flew everywhere. I'll never deliver the parcels on time now, he moaned. Edward felt terrible. With that, Diesel, as if to make himself quite clear, bumped some trucks hard. Woo! Screamed the trucks. Grrr, growled Diesel. Percy and Duck were horrified. Next morning, things were no better. Diesel's driver had not put his brakes on properly, and Diesel started to move. He went bump straight into Percy. Percy had an awful fright. Wake up there, Percy, scowled Diesel. You have work to do. He didn't even say he was sorry to Percy. Later, Diesel bumped the truck so hard that the loads went everywhere. What will the Fat Controller say, gasped Percy. He won't like it, said Duck. He was still thinking about the difficult bend. Thomas went too fast and gave the coaches a mighty biff. The carriages rolled along the line and bumped into James. Watch what you're doing, James snorted. Sorry, Thomas puffed.
Thomas was missing Annie and Clarabelle. He would never have biffed into them.
Help! Cried Percy. His driver applied the brakes. But it was too late. He went off the rails at Bulgy's bridge. Luckily, no one was hurt.
Percy was delivering a load of fresh tomatoes. Suddenly, he felt a big bump. Bust my buffers, Percy cried. What was that? Suddenly, there was a deep rumbling sound. Thomas's driver applied the brakes, but it was too late. Cinders and ashes, cried Thomas. We're stuck! And they were.
And when he could, it was too late.
He came over the top of a big hill. You can't catch us, laughed the troublesome trucks. But there was trouble ahead. Duck had stopped at the crossing at the bottom of the hill. His driver applied the brakes, but it was too late. Squashed fruit flew everywhere. Arthur was upset. His spotless record was ruined.
Thomas braked as hard as he could. But the freight cars of fish were too heavy. Oops, said Thomas. Sorry.
That night, there was a big and blustery storm. High winds swept across the island. Trees were blown down. A water tower fell over. And the roof blew right off Farmer McColl's barn.
It'll be better downhill, Skarloey said to himself. But it wasn't. His springs were weak, and the rail joints jarred his wheels. At last, a spring gave way. I feel all crooked, cried Skarloey. At last, his wheels gripped the rails again. The worst is over, he thought. Now we're away. But they weren't. I've got a cramp, he groaned. And Rheneas stopped on the loneliest part of the line.
So the next time Thomas saw Harry, he gave him a biff. And when Harry saw James, he gave him a bump. Soon the Diesels and the Steamies were biffing and banging and being bumped all over the island. The engines were in a terrible mess. Everyone needed a good washdown, and no work had been done.
We'll leave the coaches now and fetch some cars from the quarry. Cars, snorted Sir Handel. Cars. I won't. So there. Sir Handel was about to cause a great deal of trouble. Told you, said Sir Handel.
Then, another
another coupling snapped. Rosie passed Stepney in a siding. Stepney was waiting to puff onto the main line. The points changed. Stepney blew his whistle loudly. He's whistling at my carnival special, thought Rosie proudly. Oh my. But Stepney was whistling because the freight car of sugar was now rolling towards him. Stepney was covered in pink sugar from funnel to footplate. But Rosie didn't know. She puffed proudly on.
But there was trouble ahead. Some faulty points sent his freight cars one way and Thomas onto the old pier rail. Whoa! The troublesome trucks were delighted. He's falling in the water! Luckily, Thomas wasn't hurt, and the fish freight car stayed on the tracks.
Next morning, as James was being repainted, Henry had an accident. If you can't push cars properly, Henry, why not talk to a tree instead? You know how much you like the forest.
As a matter of fact, bossy boiler, Sir Topham Hatt is inspecting the island for trees that are too close to the line. He's worried they might cause trouble.
Pah! Laughed James. If I came upon a tree, I'd just push it aside.
Really?
Henry replied.
Took a big puff and blew as loud as he could. Thomas was cross. That wasn't funny, he sniffed. Percy didn't notice.
Then there was trouble. The freight cars were very heavy. Once Henry had started them rolling, they wouldn't stop. Help! Cried Henry.
Then there was trouble. The rusty coupling broke. Thomas's trucks were rolling by themselves. Cinders and ashes, cried Thomas. Thomas applied his brakes, but he stopped too quickly. The trucks bumped into the back of Thomas, and the coal spilled all over the tracks. Thomas was stuck.
But he was so busy watching the windmill sails that he forgot to look where he was going. All the flour was ruined, and the miller was upset.
I'm the greatest. Just watch me fly by.
He whistled long and loud as he approached the station. Suddenly, he saw a freight car on the line ahead.
Get out of my way!
But the freight car wouldn't move until Gordon forced it. By accident.
He didn't see that the switch had failed and that he had been diverted into a siding. "Look out, Percy!" shouted his driver and applied the brakes, but it was too late. The driver and fireman had jumped clear, but squashed fruit squirted all over Percy. Sir Topham Hatt arrived. "Percy, you are not to blame for the switch failure, but I do not run a jam factory." "Yes, sir. No, sir." And Percy squelched sadly away.
Oh, help! Gordon cried as he slid off the tracks and into a field. No one was hurt, but poor Gordon felt very undignified. What will Sir Topham Hatt say? He groaned.
And the troublesome truck sped off. Emily let out a whoosh of steam. She did know best. But suddenly, there was a terrible noise. As the dust cleared, Emily saw what had happened. The troublesome trucks had run into Mavis, who was waiting on the track. Luckily, no one was hurt, but her load of stone had spilled all over the lines, and one of the freight cars had come off the rails, knocking over a telephone pole. "Percy!" cried Mavis. "You're not supposed to be on this track." Emily was shocked. Then there was another loud crash. It was Toby. His wheels had struck the telephone pole and he was derailed. Emily knew this was all her fault, but she didn't know what to do.
As Percy was lining them up, they burst through some buffers. "Help! Help!" they wailed. But it was too late. "I'm sinking." "Serves you right," giggled the cars. "You were always barging in and moaning."
Oh no, heading straight for me, squeaked Percy.
The twins left the quarry just in time. Everyone was safe, but rubble lay all around. "Oh dear," said Bill. "This wasn't our fault. I hope Sir Topham Hatt will understand." And indeed he did.
The brand new hat blue car sped towards a junction. Gordon was waiting with the bandstand. Then there was trouble. "Oh no!" cried Thomas. Gordon was surprised.
Runaway trucks are coming, he cried. You must change the points. The signalman quickly changed the points. The troublesome trucks hurtled into a siding. They biffed and bashed the buffers.
But they headed towards Rusty. Rusty hooted loudly to the signalman. Change the points. Soon the thin control.
Percy hoped the signal at the junction would be green. He didn't want to stop next to the mine, but the signal was red. He had to stop. Suddenly, he saw something. "Bouncing buffers!" cried Percy. His driver hadn't seen the old chimney sink into the ground. The signal changed. Percy was so scared he steamed away as fast as he could. Percy hoped he wouldn't see anything else disappear. He slipped into the sidings and buffered up to the trucks. "Spooky," stammered Percy. Suddenly, another building at the old mine sank into the ground. "What was that?" shouted his driver. "Double bouncing buffers!" shrieked Percy. He was so scared he lurched forward and rammed the truck. "Naughty gnomes!" cried Percy. He steamed away faster than before, all the way back to Lower Tidmouth Station.
Sir Topham Hatt thinks I'm really useful. I had a race with Bertie once. I whooshed through the tunnel and stopped an inch from the buffers. Then Thomas made his mistake. Just like this, he boasted.
Jack scooped a bucket full of rock. "Stop!" shouted his oiler. But he didn't stop. He was too eager to help. "No!" shouted Isabella. But it was too late. "Oh, no!" he cried. "Whoops!" Jack sputtered. The driver reduced steam, but Gordon was still going too fast.
Help me, please.
"This is your fault, Puff Mighty." And he pushed back towards Mac. "Yours, Huff Mac." And he pushed back even harder. The holidaymakers watched as Mighty Mac bumped backwards and forwards. "Stop!" called the holidaymakers. "You're going to cause an accident." But it was too late. Mighty pushed back as hard as he could, and the carriage crashed into the rocks. First one rock fell, then another rock. Soon, lots of rocks came tumbling down. The track was blocked, and they were all stuck. "We'll never get to the campsite now," moaned the holidaymakers. And it was all Mighty Mac's fault. They felt terrible.
Neville was speeding through the countryside as fast as he could. Suddenly, Neville saw a barrier on the track. He slammed on his brakes. But it was too late. Neville was in terrible trouble. He was on the broken end of the bridge. Thomas knew it was all his fault. Peter Sam trundled into the wharf. Thomas got ready with his whistle. The little engines got ready too. Beep! Peter Sam shot forward. He bashed his flatbed so hard, they burst through the buffers, smashed through the oil drums stacked on the wharf, and splashed into the canal. "Oh, my," cried the little engines. "Cinders and ashes," cried Thomas.
"Faster we go, pull him along, don't let him slow." "Help!" cried Percy. His driver applied the brakes. But it was too late. He went off the rails at Bulgy's bridge.
The trucks were heavy and Percy was tired. "Have a drink," said his driver, "then you'll feel better." The water column stood at the end of the siding with the unsafe buffers. Suddenly, Percy found that he couldn't stop. The buffers didn't stop him either. Oh, wailed Percy, help! The buffers were broken and Percy was wheel-deep in coal.
Bumping the cars fiercely, he jerked his driver off the footplate and followed them into the siding. "Come back!" yelled his driver. "Fire and smoke," said Thomas. "I'm sunk."
Come on, firemen, back to our engine. They got out just in time. Henry's driver and firemen had jumped clear before the crash, but Henry lay dazed and surprised. Sir Topham Hatt came to see him.
Thomas was ready to go, but the shunters hadn't released the brakes on the freight cars. Thomas pulled as hard as he could, but the freight cars wouldn't move. "I have to hurry," puffed Thomas. He heaved, he huffed, and he puffed, and he heaved so hard, the coupling broke. Thomas shot forward. Cocoa powder flew everywhere. "Now I'll never get to take the children," puffed Thomas.